And if you have diabetes, and if you are morbidly obese, your endothelium, the cells lining the blood vessels, are especially sensitive. We tend to see endothelial dysfunction. We knew very early on that if you were an older person, or if you were obese, or if you had diabetes, they call it diabetes sometimes because they go hand in hand often. Why were these people more vulnerable? Now, they're not the only people that get COVID, but they were more vulnerable, especially at the beginning. And it turns out, if you correlate what we found in the blood vessels, the infection goes into the blood vessels, and even if you're super healthy, that will put you at risk. But we do know when you get older, and if you have diabetes, and if you are morbidly obese, your endothelium, the cells lining the blood vessels, are especially sensitive and not functioning really well. In fact, we call it endothelial is actually the name of the cell. The endothelium are the cells lining the blood vessels. But in diabetes, obesity, and in aging, we tend to see endothelial dysfunction. So you've heard of erectile dysfunction, right? So everybody understands that. Endothelial dysfunction is that your blood vessels can't get it up. And so basically what happens now is that your blood vessels can't get good blood flow going. And now if you add a virus infection on top of that destroys and damages that endothelium, you're in big trouble. So we think this is why the people with diabetes, even pre-diabetes, who are overweight or obese and older, are particularly vulnerable. It's not the only reason, but it's clearly one of the smoking guns.
This is incredible. So, and of course, this is why I'm so excited, because not only do you understand some of the root cause, like really looking at what's happening with our biology, but also looking at how we can, in no better terms, what are the nutrients and foods involved to basically provide some Viagra for our endothelium. So we're going to get into that in a moment, but I really want to dive a little bit deeper here, because I think first and foremost, especially talking with someone like yourself, there's a lot of points of contact with viruses. Like you mentioned, we have more virus particles on planet Earth than literally anything else. We're just swimming in virus particles. But we're constantly interacting with them and even sampling them. And I think that, especially when you see a lot of folks who don't have symptoms, or, maybe they don't even take the infection on, like, how is that happening? And I think there's one of those inception points, or interception points, should I say, kind of like Deion Sanders coming in and blocking the reception of the virus interacting with your cells, is our nose, for example. And so can we talk a little bit about that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, so even though viruses are too small for us to see, we are literally, when we step outside of our house or even in our houses, we are actually walking through clouds of viruses. And viruses are also inside our body. And just like bacteria, we've got good bacteria, got bad bacteria. There's viruses that are actually not harming us and probably helping us. In fact, the term microbiome, everybody thinks about good bacteria and bad bacteria, but there's also a microvirome that lives inside us as well. We basically don't understand it, but my guess is that, we depend on viruses that can, continuously interact with our bodies, trigger interactions that actually help, frankly, stimulate our health is probably the way it goes. And there may be even interactions or reactions by the viruses that live in a harmless way inside us that might actually even benefit the body. So I think all this, there's like a black box ahead of us that this pandemic has now opened our eyes to. We need to look into it. We always think about, like the bad guys, but, I tend to think about like, well, what are the good guys doing too? If you had more good guys than bad guys, you tend to have an orderly society.
And what makes bad guys go bad?
Exactly.
As well, there's usually a story behind it. So in talking about this point specifically, that it's kind of like, I think a good analogy would be our bodies quote sampling a virus or bacteria from the environment, and it's happening with our points of contact, being our skin, our nose, but primarily I think our respiratory organs, especially those kind of front-facing parts, so our mouth and our nose. So is there a potential for example, having healthy sinuses or just healthy functioning of the nose, for example, playing a role in stopping an infection in the first place? Like, why are some people not getting infected?
Yeah, well, so, I think that this sampling and ballet, maybe it's more of a tango that goes on at the interface between the air we breathe in and our body is being monitored, moderated, emceed by our immune system, right? And even though everybody talks about the immune system, I think one of the things we've learned from this pandemic is that our immune system is much more complicated than we ever thought. And so what I've been trying to explain to people is our immune system is like an army of super soldiers. And like soldiers, every group within these armed forces have their own weapons, their own skill set, their own fighting skill set, and they report their own commanders. At the end of the day, the different branches, Army, Navy, Marines, and then the subgroups, the SEALs, the Rangers, they all, at the end of the day, are all fighting on the same team, and that's team me or team you, a team body, right? So what's happening is that when we actually have good sentries, these are the guards that are just sitting there waiting to, with binoculars, like our immune system, in our noses, in our mouths. And by the way, I want to also point out, because I do research in the eye, when our eyes are open, we got a lot of sensing going on right by the skin, the conjunctiva. We tend to think about the eyes just receiving light, but it's also sensing the atmosphere around us, which is why when there's a lot of pollen, you rub your eyes. And so there's all kinds of sensors right face forward, exactly what you're talking about. And we've got antibodies, and we've got immune cells, our innate immunity that's sitting right there, the front gates. This is the front gate of our defenses are one of the intermediators, the guard, the sentry that actually samples who's come to the gate and decides if they like them or not. Let me see your passport, right? And so passport control, our TSA, Homeland Security of the body, actually is that very front gate. Now, when we talk about the super soldiers, if once you let, it's kind of like going through passport control. Once you go through your passport, you keep on going, there's still more cops on the other side. There's still more security on the other side checking you out, making sure you're doing all the right things. And I think that's what also happening in the body is that most of the bad viruses and bacteria are held at bay, no entry, banned. Okay, or we got to take you off to the side and tackle you, and that's basically how this front gate innate immune system works. Our antibodies, we've got IgA, immunoglobulin A, which is one of the different types of antibodies our body makes. They're nonspecific. They are just sitting there, armed and ready to take down a virus or a bacteria that might be coming up, and they just are looking for any kind of bad guys that need to stay out of the body.
I love that so much. So we want a good security system, of course. And I love that you pointed this. That's such a great analogy of having the different pieces of the armed forces. One of those being that front-facing portion, one of those being where, today we know the vast majority of our immune system is hanging out in our gut and our gastrointestinal tract, for example. That's another point of contact and work. And so definitely we're going to talk more about that. But I just want to reiterate this again, because we're experiencing something incredibly challenging right now, but this isn't the last thing. We're continuously going to be exposed to novel viruses, novel strains of bacteria. And ultimately, of course, the place that we're really trying to get to today, and why I'm having Dr. Leon is so excited about this, is getting our citizens more resilient for what is definitely imminent. And so just to reiterate this point again, you mentioned we have this virome, this microvirome, the human virome. We have over 400 trillion viruses in and on our bodies right now. And some of them are pathogenic, like they can make us sick. But also, again, this got me back into the data early on, looking at the human genome itself, when that was mapped out and all the surprises that came from that. We just thought we would have so many different genes, especially like compared to, flies and things like that. But we come to find out we've got like 20,000-ish genes that we're all sharing, but we have this dramatically incredible array of epigenetic influences that can change what our genes do so much, making us so different in our appearance, making us so different in our performance and our health. And one of those big pieces I saw in the Human Genome Project, 8% of the human genome itself is endogenous retroviruses. So when Dr. Lee is stating the fact that this is a part of us, that in some ways viruses help us, but in other ways, we do have these experiences of having new things that we have to adapt to, and we need to get ourselves to a better place for us to adapt. So with this said, I want to talk about this intersection point of the gut and our food and how that might play a part in our susceptibility. And specifically, you talk about something in your incredible book, New York Times bestseller, Eat to Beat Disease, the body's defense systems. So can you talk about what that is, the body's defense systems, the body's health defense systems, and how activating these systems can really help in situations like this and everything else in our lives that we're challenged with?
Yeah, you're so right, Shawn. This isn't the first mass illness that we have to deal with. There's others coming. But even before we were even talking about coronaviruses, we were talking about cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, dementia, and Alzheimer's, a number of autoimmune diseases, all these other things. Listen, I went to medical school. I spent, 4 years memorizing thick textbooks of every single disease has been discovered in over 4,000 years of Western medicine. The one thing they never taught us actually how to do that I actually formed the body of my work is that so as a doctor, you're trained to ask, well, like, okay, what causes the disease? What's going on with the disease? But I wound up actually building my career asking the question, why don't we get sick more often? Why don't we get sick more often, right? So that's the way of answering the question, what is health? If health is what? If you ask most people, health is the absence of disease. I'm not sick. How do you know you're healthy? Because I'm not sick. Well, okay, so then what is health? Not being sick? That's not a very satisfactory answer. And if you're really operationalizing it, you can't operationalize a negative. You can't do something about the absence of something else, right? Really, it kind of twists your mind when you think about that. So I started asking, well, what is health? Well, health, if it's not the absence or not only the absence of disease, what is it the result of? Our health, is what my research has shown, is a result of our body's hardwired health defense systems that we're born with. They formed in the womb. When we were developing in the uterus, in our mom's uterus, we were forming these health defense systems that stay with us from the time we're born to our very last breath. Even when you're dying, your health defenses are still trying to resist disease. So now, turn it right back to that question. How come we don't get sick more often? It leads your mind to go think something else. Like, yeah, that's a really good question. Let me throw a couple of kind of like examples of why that question matters. So we know cigarette smoke causes lung cancer. And how many of us has breathed cigarette smoke coming out of a bar or a restaurant or a bus stop, and that cigarette smoke went into our lungs? And how come we didn't develop lung cancer ourselves, right? I mean, it's not like, oh yeah, the smoker's going to develop it, but how come we didn't? We breathed it. When you're actually out at the beach, we know that bright sunshine, sunlight, ultraviolet radiation could cause skin cancer. So almost all of us have gone out and laid out in the sun. Our skin darkens, our pigment darkens, we get a tan. Now, how come we didn't get skin cancer? I mean, yeah, sure, people that burn do get skin cancer. That's an explanation. But how come the rest of us didn't get that skin cancer? That wound up becoming the body of my work. And one of the things that I wrote about in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, is, and this is the subtitle of the book, the new science of how your body defends itself. Okay, and how do we do this? We do this with 5 health defense systems. It's probably more than 5, but I'll tell you, 5 is what keeps us alive. And it's angiogenesis, our circulation keeps us alive. Without a good, healthy circulation, we die because our blood vessel network, we talked about endothelial cells, actually bring oxygen and nutrients to every single cell and organ of our body. So we got to keep that in perfect shape, and foods can boost that. Number two, our stem cells. Now, when we were only an egg plus sperm and fertilized into an ovum and started to develop into, this early cluster of living cells, we were all made out of stem cells. And as we got turned into a human, a human being, looked like an arm and a leg, a couple of eyes, and we were born, we kept some of those stem cells around. Where are they? They're in our skin. They're in our bone marrow. They're even in our hearts and our brains, we now figured out. And the fact is that when we're adults, those stem cells defend us against disease because they repair damaged organs. We don't even know the damage that goes on in our organs, and these invisibly come out, and behind, while we're sleeping, they're coming out, and they're actually repairing, our damaged goods. Our microbiome, which we started talking about already, defends our health. Our DNA, and everybody thinks about DNA as our genetic code. It's not like it's a Rosetta Stone and you just kind of read through the code. No, man, our DNA is active. It's dynamic. It's changing. You talked about the viral integration in the DNA. Our DNA is about as alive as you can think about it, like an octopus, in an aquarium. It's doing all kinds of things. And one of the things it's doing is dividing, replacing itself. But our DNA makes 10,000 mistakes every single day in the typical human body, and each of those mistakes can lead to a cancer. So how come we don't develop cancer all the time? Because our DNA fixes these mistakes. It's got its own spell check. It can actually look for the typos and fix them automatically. It's got its own, when there's big damage, like not just single letters that are misspelled, not just misspellings, but big chunks that are damaged. Think about that the last time you went out and got really burned in your skin. And I'm not talking about sunburn now. I'm talking about like a candle burn, an oil burn, something in the kitchen maybe. Now think of all the mutations that occurred with that injury. Okay. Well, guess what? It knows how to repair those potholes. It can fix it. And as we age, our DNA naturally is at risk for more damaging because the telomeres that protect the caps of our DNA burn down like the candle itself. I call it a life fuse. When that fuse burns down, you're right at the powder keg. And bottom line is that we can actually slow down that burning with food and fix the DNA with food. And then back to home base, what we just talked about is our immune system. It turns out our immune system is our final defense system that I wrote about. Angiogenesis, stem cells, microbiome, DNA, and immunity. These are 5 legs of the stool of our health. We sit on this. This is what props us up every single day that keeps us from getting sick more often.
Powerful. This is so good. So powerful. So I got to ask you about a couple of things before we dive into what are some of the things that we can help to do to kind of support our health defense systems. I want to ask you about vascular endothelial growth factor, aka VEGF. This might be a new term for a lot of folks, but when talking about the endothelial component of this, it just really got my wheels turning and how this might be playing a role here. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first of all, VEGF sounds like a superpower, right? Like, a Marvel universe, right? And it's like, so, and actually it is kind of one of the body's natural super healing proteins. So we got a lot of proteins in our body and we haven't researched them all, but we know some of them are super important, like insulin's really important, thyroid hormone. These are all proteins. VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, is one of the more recent discoveries. Now I got to confess something, which is I was working in the lab that first discovered VEGF. And this was, so many years ago, I don't even want to talk about it, but we were hunting for this invisible factor that we knew if we had blood vessels growing in a plastic dish, if there was a drop of this substance X that was in there. That's how we thought about it. We knew that the moment that drop hit it, and it would be like, imagine a video of this, like a drop coming down, hitting the water, causing that ripple effect. And once that drop got in there, blood vessels would be activated, and a single blood vessel would start to branch out, sprout. You'd get a whole spider web that would come out of a single drop of this VEGF. It took time to figure it out, but here's what it is. It is the body's natural blood vessel growing factor. Vascular endothelium are the cells lining blood vessels. This is the growth factor that causes them, it tells them, hey, wake up, dudes, time to go to work. Okay? It is like that, that alarm in the morning. That's what VEGF is, and it gives very specific instructions. It doesn't just wake them up; it actually tells them exactly what to do. And they sprout, they divide, they extend, they form arcades, beautiful arcades, and they start from thick blood vessels down to skinny ones. The thick ones, we have the biggest blood vessel in our body is called the aorta. It's the big one that pumps blood. We got two big ones in our neck, carotid arteries, But the amazing ones are the ones that are harder to see. They're smaller than a human hair, okay? And we have 19 billion of those things. And those are actually what bleeds when we cut ourselves, even a paper cut. You're not cutting a big artery. You're not jetting blood out. But that blood that comes up when you get a paper cut, that's because you cut through some of those 19 billion capillaries. That's actually what keeps us alive. So VEGF is a great thing until it's a bad thing. And it can be a bad thing in some diseases like cancer, those mutations that our body can't repair enough, which is why we want to eat foods that can help our body protect the good blood vessels and not the bad ones. When cancers actually start without a blood supply because of mutations, they can't grow bigger than the head of a ballpoint pen. Let me see if I can see a ballpoint pen around here. I can show just how big it is. Well, this isn't really a ballpoint pen, but you can kind of see this is a pen. That little tip there, that little nub, that's it. That's how big a cancer can get without oxygen. But a few of these cancer cells can figure out how to hijack our vascular system and selfishly grow blood vessels to it, right? It's like a bank robber going in there to bust out some cash. Well, how does a cancer do this? It copy pastes VEGF. It learns how to actually make the healing factor, and instead of healing, it drops some of that good stuff to wake up the vascular endothelial cells, the blood vessels, and the vessels are tricked into feeding the cancer instead. And the moment that blood vessels touch that little nub that couldn't grow without a blood supply, we've done research to show once angiogenesis or blood vessels touch a tumor, a tiny little tumor can grow 16,000 times in size in 2 weeks. So this is the trigger for tumor growth. Without angiogenesis, without VEGF, tumors are essentially harmless.
Oh my goodness, this is fascinating. The body is so amazing, and there's so many different things going on. So not only is your body repairing, spell checking DNA mistakes and doing processes to, prevent angiogenesis to cancer cells, for example, and, defending your body against novel viruses, and the list goes on and on. It's all of these multifaceted roles, but in this role specifically, I would imagine that somebody with the severe COVID infection, for example, that their VEGF would probably shooting up pretty high, would be kind of another indicator that something's going on. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not aware yet that we've actually studied circulating levels of VEGF in people with COVID. And in fact, you've actually sparked a new research idea, because we should be doing this, Shawn. We will document on your podcast. This is where this idea began, and we'll have to acknowledge it if it turns out into anything positive out of the research study. But I will tell you, we're still grappling with acute COVID infection. Obviously, we're trying to get vaccinated so we can prevent getting the COVID. But the other problem that's occurring is long COVID, or people who have gotten the infection and they seem like their lungs have gotten better, but then months later they wind up having all these same bizarre things all over again. Head brain fog and smelling problems and racing heart, all kinds of muscle skeletal weaknesses, and we know that there's chronic inflammation. We know there's vascular damage. I've been studying that. And I'm wondering, maybe a biomarker for the damage actually would be high levels of circulating VEGF, because inflammation, not only cancer, but inflammation also triggers VEGF to come out. Because usually, and you have to think about it, we started talking about VEGF as a good guy. It is. You need it to build all the muscles. You need it to build your heart. You need to keep your circulation good. But in the case of disease, the body responds and sometimes gets tricked. And inflammation can cause a lot of VEGF to go out, which can also, cause chaos.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today.
Angiogenesis, we talked about fruit peel to help endothelial cells stay healthy. Immune system, we talked about broccoli sprouts. Let's talk about regeneration, stem cells. It turns out that cacao, dark chocolate,